Welcome to Board Game Binge, the place where we bring you bite-sized, bingeable board game content from across the industry. I'm your host, James Staley, and in this 50th episode of the Board Game Binge podcast, producer Mike Bruner and I reflect on the past episodes with highlights and key learnings. Mike, let's welcome everybody to the Binge. How you doing, man?
Good. How are you?
I tell you, I am ecstatic. 50 episodes. I can't even get my head around that. It has been like a blink of an eye. Like, I don't know how you're feeling, but my God, I never thought we'd get to 50 this fast, but it's been a roller coaster.
Yeah, it's been a fun journey to interact with so many designers across the industry, so many artists, so many people that help games make it to production. And it doesn't seem like we've been doing it for as long as we have, but
yeah. And still, obviously we got a ton more to go, and I can't wait to see kind of what's coming forward to the next 50. But man, like, you got to think when we started this, and I think it's important to kind of highlight to people why we started this. And if there's anybody watching live, feel free, if you got questions for us, shoot it down in the comment area. We'll do our best to answer any questions you guys have for us. Whatever's on your mind, shoot it to us and we'll get through them all. But when we started this was, I guess, back in May of this past year. Our goal was really to create an area where people can go for learning. I know myself, I'm a game designer and publisher with Tin Rollback Games. You've got Elixir Games with your game. And I got a kind of behind me here on the shelf here, the Queen Bee. Awesome game, by the way. Played it a couple weeks ago. What I found was there's this kind of thirst for knowledge and trying to learn as much as you can about the industry, because it is a steep learning curve, right? And it's very, very wide and goes very, very deep in terms of the information that you got to kind of gather to either publish a game or even publish a game on Kickstarter. And I kind of look at those as the same or even separate. And what I found was a lot of the groups that I went on, a lot of them were kind of meme based, right? There wasn't anywhere other than, I'd say, Jamie Stagmeyer's and great website, StonemeyerGames.com. You can see all of his blogs. He does post games and all of his launches. But other than that, I couldn't really find somewhere where I could get a good kind of, consolidation of different developers and designers across the industry and their learnings and, wanting to learn from other people. The best way to do that, I figured, was by talking to them, interviewing them. Which kind of led to us creating this Facebook group and this podcast, right? And it's been kind of crazy. I know at the beginning, the very first one I had was literally, I think, on my iPhone. The audio wasn't the best for the first few episodes. I'd say after, I think, episode 4, it was me just actually learning how to use my mic properly. I think I had it angled it the wrong way, which is kind of funny. I think that we've had some hot mic moments, which have been memorable. So we've learned how to circumvent those going forward. We've had 2. One was more gracious exit than the other. But it's interesting the learnings you have on the technology side when you do these kind of podcasts. Even sometimes I'd forget to hit record, right? So I'd be interviewing the person and then I'll be 10 minutes in. I'm like, I'm so sorry. Can we go back and start that again? I forgot to hit record. So a lot of this has actually just been building in like redundancies into the technology and kind of building in ways to make sure it's covered. It is a lot of work. I don't know if people appreciate, I have a new appreciation of content creators. I know we've had a lot of them on the show, and I love to kind of dig deep into that kind of stuff. Cause like take the most recent one where John Gets Games, right? And we're talking to him and I said, your video, you do like a 40-minute video. How many hours goes into that? It was like 10 hours, right? Talking to the Board Game Coffee guys as well, right? They say, for them to do a review video, they got to get the game. They have to research it. They have to play it. They have to play it again and play it again, have a good handle on it before they go and actually even just do a review. Like, these are hours upon hours on it. So any way you can kind of, cut through the clutter and find kind of shortcuts, I think has been pretty cool.
Yeah, and even on the front end, getting people on the schedule, trying to make sure everybody's schedule lines up, and reaching out, finding people that are on Kickstarter, finding out people who have published games that are willing to talk on certain days. There's a
Yeah.
lot that happens before, a lot that happens after, and
I don't think people realize necessarily sometimes that you're the wizard behind the curtain too, right? So like for people listening or people watching, like 80% of these interviews are lined up by Mike, right? So it is Mike's network that he's tapped into to bring all of these great stories that these people have brought to us. And a personal thank you to you, Mike. There's no way we'd be where we are right now if it wasn't for you. So it's been pretty cool. I think it's been a good team. The two of us kind of working through these, but you're right though. It's something as simple as, now I need to get better at this myself, is even reaching out to some of the guests more than on like 1 or 2 days earlier and say, hey, just to make sure, are we still good for Thursday or for Monday? Because there's been times where I think everything's good. And we're like 5 minutes to go live, and the person comes in a panic, like, oh my God, I totally forgot about this. And they've all turned out really well.
mm-hmm.
But man, that's undue stress that I always feel bad about putting on people. So I know personally, I'm going to try to get better at that and just kind of try to give them more of a heads up so that they're better prepared. So I thought on this podcast, we would go through some of the highlights that we've had over the past 49 episodes. Well, I guess it'd be 47 or 48, because the first one was just our introduction. But what are some of the highlights for you, Mike? What are some of the things that, are standout moments for you in these past episodes?
I think it's, every episode, every story, every game has a story behind it, and it's fun seeing behind the curtain of how things come about. And I think as a game designer myself, and a lot of the listeners, they want to know how a game comes to production. And a lot of times people think they have to create something magical or something unique that's not out there before. And in Tim Eisner's interview, you specifically said, hey, what mechanic is the Tim Eisner mechanic? And he came back and he said, I'm going to have to get back to you on that because I can't think of it right now. And he's a fairly popular game designer. And I
Title
think
Blades,
just
right? Like
Title Blades, the Grim Force, to name a few. And where he doesn't have a unique mechanic, you don't have to invent something new. You just have to put things that you enjoy and things that you like together in a nice package. And so if you don't have a unique idea, that doesn't matter.
That's a good point, actually. And I think what he said on that, he's like, for him, it's more taking different mechanics and combining them, right? And I think that's where we've seen this evolution in the board game industry, where if you go back to the 80s, right, and you have the Monopolies and the Risks of the world, and then Euro style games started coming in, and then you start seeing combination of different types of games. They keep building on each other, these new mechanics as they come in, and people, I think, are finding interesting and new ways to utilize some of these mechanics that maybe weren't thought of in the past. And then I think that's going to inform even game development for the years to come, right? There's going to be some new things that are come up. There'll be combinations of things that are just happening now, which is pretty cool. For me, I think it's, I always get excited when I get an instant message from someone direct messages me after an interview and says, hey, that person you're just talking to, is there any way you can connect me to them? Right. So, Nigel Matthews of ShipQuest is a great example of that. That was a great interview, going really deep on the logistics side. Not a lot of people get excited about logistics. I get excited about logistics. Not a lot of people do, but it's such a key, crucial component. As you know, being a game guy that's actually launched a game, you got to know this stuff, right? And having a resource like that, I had several people reach out to me saying, hey, how best do I get a hold of Nigel? I want to learn a little bit more about ShipQuest. So for me, that gets me excited, because that means we're actually doing what we set out to do, which is create a knowledge base for people to benefit from, right? Mm-hmm. I thought a cool thing too was the chai tea and high tea interview with the Kazmeyers. I don't know if you remember that interview, but there's two things that blew me away on that interview. One is the first time, not that I had seen it, but the first time I had paid attention to a campaign using social media targets to unlock stretch goals. I know lots of people have done it, but it was the first time I really noticed it was when I was watching their campaign. I thought, wow, that's a pretty clever thing to do. building an audience is such a key component of, getting your Kickstarter campaign going. I thought that was cool. One. And two, they did 50% more on their second campaign, which was a expansion kit to their first game. And it was people coming, what drove a lot of those numbers were people that didn't even maybe opt in on the first game, but when they saw the expansion, it interested them enough. They said, okay, give me the level where I get the base game plus the expansion. And I thought that was pretty clever too, right? So I think there's some people out there that might have games where maybe they've launched on Kickstarter and now they're thinking about their next game to go on Kickstarter. Well, maybe there's an option in between there to do like an expansion of your current game and get some new interest in that base game that maybe people didn't learn about it the first time around.
Yeah, that's, there's so many. I find myself listening to the podcast. We'll have a guest that I either know or know of, and I think I'm not going to learn anything that episode, so I'm just sitting back and listening, and then I'm like, that's good information. Let me get my pen and write it down. Like with Green Inbox, I hadn't heard of Green Inbox before, and I don't know how we got connected to them, but they were either from you or from one of our previous interviews, and so I wrote them down and just take notes of the success that people have, and try different things out.
That one I found when it was actually after the Kazmaiers. I think they used Green Inbox. Facade Games had used Green Inbox. So we saw two really huge campaigns in a row that had used Green Inbox. So I wanted to learn more about it. Like you, I thought, okay, what do they do? Like, I'm not really sure how this works. So reached out and met Aaron and said, hey, would you come on the podcast and just talk to us about this? Number one, was it hugely informative, right?
Mm-hmm.
Hugely informative in terms of, I call it social media amplification. And I'll talk about that kind of near when we get to the end of the podcast and talk about some of the key learnings. But what I thought was really interesting about that one was that they have actually lined up investors that will help factor a social media buy. Right. So if someone has a campaign and they think, gosh, based on the testing we've done, we think we can get, a 5-time factor for every dollar we spend, we'll get $5 coming in terms of pledges. That's a good ratio. Just the more money you pump into this, the more money you're going to get back. Many people in that position say, great, but I'm doing Kickstarter because I have no money, right? I have no money to pump into this, right? That's why I'm doing Kickstarter. If I had money, I wouldn't be doing Kickstarter.
Yep.
And so they've solved that by saying, okay, well, if you're in a position like that, we have some venture capitalists that are there to help with that investment and do bridge loans to cover that off. So that was very, very interesting. And that caught me off guard. I didn't see that coming at all. And it was a pretty cool learning. I think it's something definitely I wrote down. I actually watched the interview back afterwards just to make sure I locked it in my brain as to what he said.
Well, one thing that I especially like about that is as soon as you hit that launch button, you get so many vendors coming your way, and some are better than others. And we had the Chai, we had the Facade Games, we've had people that have used them and have had success. So now it adds credibility to that versus the other, vendors that'll come your way on your day one launch.
Yeah, I think that Facade is a good example of how you see this stepped growth, right, of successive campaigns. So you have one campaign and they've got this really clever idea of creating like a book. So the box actually looks like a book you can put on your shelf. And now every game they do another book. So it's like you're adding to your collection of books on your shelf. So it looks visually very nice on your bookshelf or on your game shelf. But if you look at their successive campaigns, each one adds more backers, right? So they're bringing over, say, 50% of their backers from the prior campaign or more, and it just keeps growing. So, their last campaign, I think they hit almost $1 million, or, I think once they went through their pledge manager at the back end, they're at $1 million. Went from a few $100,000 to $1 million over, 3 or 4 campaigns. That's a pretty interesting growth. And, for me, I think that was a pretty good learning too, that for people that are looking to get in the first place, there's nothing wrong starting small, right? So you don't have to kind of bat for the fences there at the gate. You can do something that's small, manageable, take the learning from that, and then do your next game, build on that learning. And for me, it's Artheris Games is another example where he was doing that on a bit smaller scale than Facade Games, but same thing. Andrew Burkett, I believe it was, he launched a game. Then his next game, his goal was just to increase his backer count. And he was saying, my goal is to carry over 50% of my backers from campaign to campaign. If I keep doing that as I'm adding and growing, I should start getting to the numbers I want to get to eventually. And, he's going the right direction. He's got a growth curve, right? Each campaign is bigger than the last, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah.
What do you think about some of the artists we had on the show? We had quite a few. We had Andrew Bosley, Sarah Keel, Anthony Hoare, Tristam Rossum, all super talented. Was there anything that kind of stood out to you with the obviously Andrew Bosley is with Everdell and donating a game for us to give away, which was great. There's a lot of interest that came in, but anything else stand out for you on those interviews or?
I like their perspective. I think the bulk of our interviews have been game designers. And so getting people with logistics, people getting with marketing and getting the artist perspectives, I think is something fairly unique to our podcast. And they all have different opinions on how to work with artists and whatnot. Sarah Keel primarily with Facade Games. She did my board for Queen Bee as well. And she's just, a good person, great to work with. And
congratulations, Sarah and Josh, by the way, they just had a baby.
Thanksgiving Day.
Yeah. Congratulations. Wow. Cute little guy. I just saw the picture today. I think what's kind of funny to me though, and I asked the same question to every one of them, which is how do you deal with the question of, budgets or someone asking you how much is it going to cost for your work? Like how best they navigate that dialogue. And even me asking that question felt uncomfortable. And I don't think we got a good, clean template of any of them. I think, and I'd encourage people to go back and listen to those episodes. I mean, we touch on some of the ways to do that. And there's some good insights there, but it was interesting that they all had a very similar response that, yes, it's kind of an uncomfortable conversation to have. How do you value something that you do? They try to assign time to it, but it goes beyond time, right? It's, if you're hiring Andrew Bosley, for instance, you're hiring for a very specific style, right? Sarah Keel, very specific style, right? So, each of these artists have, a talent that adds value to that. So it's not just like you're going to down to the mall and paying someone an hourly rate. Like these are talented artists, right? So how do you have that conversation with them on what the cost would be? And I think we all kind of landed on all those interviews is that it's best to be upfront with the artist of here's my budget and ask them what can they do for that budget is probably a better way to do it versus saying, what's this going to cost? And then you have to then say, well, I don't have that. And then get into that back and forth, almost like you're haggling over art, which is never a fun discussion. So,
and with Sarah's, something I noticed in hers, she touched on what's art versus what's illustration versus what's graphic design. And I think that's for people just designing a game. I think it's important to know the different roles that art and graphic design are. So, hey, if this artist is this much, they're in my budget, but they might not be covering everything that you want them to cover because they're doing the illustration and not the graphic design.
That's a great point. I mean, I'm going through this right now in a game I'm working on with very talented Mitch DeSlepp out of Toronto. And it's a Nutty Squirrels game that's going to be coming out in the first quarter. And he's an artist, right? So he's doing the illustrations. But I'll need like a graphic artist, or I might do it myself because I have some experience there, doing the layout, right? Laying it out onto, onto the box and, getting the, instruction sheets and everything all set up. That's something you're going to use a graphic artist for, right? You're not necessarily going to use an illustrator for it. Those are very different things. So yeah, that was actually pretty insightful too. That's pretty cool. I think it's interesting that for me, talking to some of these people that are services helping the industry, I thought was kind of cool. So take like, for instance, like Joe Slack, right? Board game design course. he was actually on the podcast to talk about his game, which I can never pronounce, Relics of Rajalavahara, which is a solo-based game. But
it just flows right off the tongue, doesn't it?
It just flows right out. Yeah, I always rib him for it. But and interesting enough, here's 6 Degrees of Separation is the artwork was actually done by Tristram.
Funny.
Yeah, he was the artist on that, which is kind of neat. So, but it's cool to see people helping others in the industry. So Joe's kind of full-time job in this design course is helping other people either create their game or helping kind of set up how best you promote it and so forth. Leans heavier on the, the creation side. Anybody that didn't check out that podcast, check it out. If not, go try to get on his, look for the link, which I think was on the podcast that we did. If not, I can drop in the bottom here. But he sends out a weekly email where he gives, here's some tips on some things you might want to consider. I learned something almost every one of these emails he sends out. He did one on Tabletop Simulator this past week. So he did a little video tutorial. And sometimes I say, hey, that's too good just to leave in an email. Joe, can you please drop it in the Board Game Binge Facebook group? But, he did a Tabletop Simulator tutorial saying, it's not that hard. Here's how you put your prototype game on Tabletop Simulator. So it's kind of cool seeing, people in the industry who aren't necessarily, obviously a lot of them are focused on creating board games, but finding ways to support the industry. And you're seeing, I think, the industry expand into support. Accessories is another good example. So Game Trace, which came in from you with Noel. And that was, to me, fascinating that there's a business that's been created out of organization trace. Mm-hmm. Right. And I know you had a good experience with it because you have it in your game that's behind me here, but seeing that, or seeing the, what was it? Tokens, Dan Blacklock with his Token Sesame, or he had his Box Throne. I got to say that Box Throne giveaway that we did, holy smokes. he donated like a $600 shelving system for us just to give away. That was insane. That was one of, I think, one of my favorite giveaways that we did, but very, very cool to see kind of these satellite industries kind of popping up around the board game industry.
Yeah. It's fun seeing the problems that board games create and then the solutions that get solved by them, whether it's game trays or organizers or whatever it is. Cause it's always tempting to get something a little bit nicer when it's out there.
Yeah, exactly. That's true. Right? Coins. I want my metal coins. Take Gamecrafter as another good example of that. Although he's a manufacturer that focuses on small runs, like 500 units or less is kind of his sweet spot. For me, the learning there was he was USA based. I assumed he was just brokering out to China. Mm-hmm. So I was talking to him, I said, JT, like off air, I go, I apologize. I actually told a couple of people that you're probably outsourcing to China. I clarify that on the podcast. That's incredible that you're doing this in North America, and you can do it at a level that's competitive with these other manufacturers that are producing in China. Like it's crazy. And for me, I think it was neat to see, I had used Gamecrafter myself. I'm not sure if you've used Gamecrafter in your past, but I know a lot of people have. But there was stuff that he does that I didn't even know he did. So that's kind of some of the gold for me as well when we do these podcasts. And you learn something. You assume you know everything there is about that person you're talking to. And then they throw something out and he's like, oh yeah, we do custom meeples. I was like, what? Custom meeples? When? Oh no, just go to this page right here.
Yeah.
Just click through this link. Oh, sure it is. I was like, whoa. So that was pretty cool. I'd actually say what's interesting is that was actually the top downloaded episode we've had since we started the podcast with JT. So obviously there's a lot of people that are interested in prototyping. So I think what we'll try to do maybe is in future episodes, maybe we can try to find some more people to help with the prototyping. I know, for instance, Joe Slack, he talks a lot about prototyping using, stuff around the house and so forth, but I think that'd be kind of cool.
Yeah.
What'd you think about, I'm going to throw two names at you, the Jamie Stagmeyer and James Hudson interviews. Those ones are almost back to back. That was pretty cool. You're able to line both those up. For me, I was incredibly grateful for one, because we were still pretty small in terms of our member base at the time when they did those interviews. But it's interesting to kind of see two leaders in the indie game industry. One kind of going the route of creating their own self-publishing game company, right? So Stonemaier Games stopped doing Kickstarter, moved more towards self-publishing, very successfully, of course. And then on the other side, you got James Hudson, Druid City Games, going deeper into working with others. In fact, merging with Skybound, right? And Skybound is a behemoth, right? Like they started the Walking Dead graphic novel, among other huge IP properties, right? So it's kind of cool seeing how those two went different directions. What were your thoughts on those interviews?
I like, part of the reason why I reached out to them was they've reached the level that I think every aspiring game designer wants to get, doing this full time, making games, and making good games. And so hearing their stories both times, I think James Hudson came from the trucking industry or something not too long ago, and now he's doing board games full time. And then Jamie Stegmaier kind of got on Kickstarter right when Kickstarter was becoming relevant, and then got off of Kickstarter because he got to the level where he didn't feel he needed it anymore, and enjoys, I think he said he enjoys some aspects of Kickstarter, but not all aspects. And so he does it his own way now. And that would be cool to be at that level someday.
I think GameFound is another group that probably doesn't like the way Kickstarter does things, because they're coming out with their own platform. That's someone I've reached out to. Hopefully we can get them on the podcast to learn a little bit more about their new platform they're launching. I thought that was pretty cool too. What I find interesting when you talk to people like them, Tim Eisner is another good example where, doing it full time with Weird City Games now, and the evolution of the individual from having fun, creating games kind of as a side thing, and hey, this is good extra income and fun I'm having over here. And then when it transitions into a full-time job, the shift, right? Where now it's like, oh, this is serious stuff. This is actually business. This is no longer leisure. This is business, right? So now I got to be more disciplined. I talked to Tim Eisner and he's saying, he goes, I said, Tim, you've got so many things on the go right now. Like just the games he was listing off that he was working on, like he's got like 8-10 projects at any given time. How do you manage it? And he is incredibly disciplined, right? Like he carves off X amount of time that he's going to spend on his current game, X amount of time he's going to spend on, the game that's currently going into be, final production and publishing and so forth. And, for me, that was, it was interesting when you hear people say, oh, I'd love to do this as a full-time job. Are you sure?
Because it's still a job.
Because it's a job. Yeah. And there's a reason why people do things as hobbies. It's to get away from their full-time job and do something that can allow them to decompress and just kind of get creative and have fun. And, once you kind of join the dark side of, okay, I'm going to do this as a business, you're still going to have all those elements. And I'm sure these guys would much rather do what they're doing right now than maybe what their prior jobs were. But there still does come a huge level of work that's involved with that, I think.
Yeah.
For me, I think one of the other ones I had was kind of the key highlights that come out of that. So, I've been trying to recap each of these episodes as we do them. And I reflect back and say, okay, what's something I learned in there? And one thing I really set out to do when we started was figure out what is the difference between like a $10,000 game on Kickstarter and like a $150,000 game on Kickstarter, right? What drives that bridge, and were we going to see any themes emerge? And I think we have, and let me just preface this with, this is my personal opinion. And Mike, if you're going to jump in, this is going to be your personal opinion as well. But I have started seeing some consistencies between these, these large campaigns and some of these smaller campaigns. And, I thought for, the people listening on the podcast, or maybe rewatching this back afterwards, maybe we can go through a few of those and at least get some kind of thought stimulated. These are very, very high level. So please do yourself a favor, go to Stegmaier's blog and, read a lot of his post games. That's going to help you out a lot. Joe Slack, read his book, get his weekly updates. That's going to help you a lot going into the process. You got, Bobby the Board Game Hacker. He's great at starting social media. He's a good one that we've interviewed as well. Good one to kind of figure out, okay, how do I start kind of planting the seeds of building that audience? But let's jump into some of these key things for success. So I'll start off with the first one I've got in my mind. One is bigger campaigns usually have a team of individuals behind them. So it doesn't mean you can't do huge numbers as a single person doing a campaign, but it's a lot of work, right? Like you and I have both done campaigns, very, very small. I did the first two. I pretty much did myself. I'm not sure if you had much help with your campaign. They're a massive amount of work. So if you can build out a virtual team, right, of people to help you with those tasks, or quite frankly, build out a team, including service providers that can show it, like say, again, take Green Inbox, good example, social media amplification. They've got a team of 50 in Israel where they're working through literally thousands using AI software to run through thousands of different iterations of combinations and permutations of ads to figure out, best way to optimize that. Sure, you could do your own social media, but adding a group like that onto your team is going to help, right? So bigger teams usually have, I see more success is happening in the ones that have teams versus just individuals.
Yeah.
You agree with that? The other one I would say is audience building. So most seem to have a pre-built audience. So whether it be an audience they're carrying over from prior campaigns, audiences they've created by having people follow along in the development of their game or been part of creating a community. The Kazmaiers did a great job of this with Steep Games did this, had people, weigh in on their artwork as they're going along, weigh in on, hey, here's a little prototype of what the tile is going to look like. And so, hey, we got this board that keeps the tiles from falling off and they kind of rest in here. All these little things where people can feel like they're part of that process seems to help build that community. And when you come into a campaign with a pre-built community, it seems to really give you a massive leg up than kind of coming in cold. And I think that's a mistake a lot of people make. I made that mistake in my first campaign, right? It is infinitely more difficult and stressful if you try to create that, the month going into your campaign. And, the one thing I think Jamie Stagmeyer said very eloquently in his book, which I read before we did his interview, just to make sure I kind of understood where he was coming from, is he said, if you delay your campaign, nothing is going to happen.
Yep.
Nothing bad is going to happen to you if you delay your campaign on Kickstarter. If you rush your campaign out the door because you created an artificial date that you're trying to stick to, lots of bad stuff can happen.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And like you mentioned, I think a lot of people make the mistake of, hey, I've got a great game. It'll sell itself. I just need to get it up on Kickstarter and then it'll take off. And do you know who else thinks that? Everybody else launching their game the same day as you. And so you have to create the audience, and designing games is fun. Playtesting games is fun. Marketing isn't always fun for everybody, and building that audience isn't always fun. It's not designing a game, but it's one of the more crucial steps in getting your game published. You have to build that audience. Otherwise you're selling to nobody.
I've actually had people say to me, I was, scrolling through Kickstarter and I found, these 3 campaigns did massive numbers. They hit like 400,000 in sales, in pledges, and, they're crappy games. So, my game is much better than that. So it should at least be able to do 10% of that. I think sometimes what's missing is some of these games, and this is going to get to one of my points in a second, may do well because they have intellectual property already built behind them, right? So take Walking Dead, for example. Not that they've got a card game, but say Walking Dead comes out with a card game tomorrow. They're going to bring a massive audience in just because it's The Walking Dead. And, so they're going to start with the leg up, right? So they could have the crappiest card game ever, and they're still going to sell quite a number of copies just because it's Walking Dead. Again, not saying that they're launching a card game or that they would do a crappy game, but just trying to illustrate an example of an
No
IP,
spoilers here.
of an intellectual property, right? So take any kind of intellectual property, applied to anything, is going to come with a built-in audience. So you just got to be kind of mindful of that when you are kind of browsing some of these groups. The example of Facade Games with multiple campaigns building on each other. Again, the Kazmaier Steep Games with their Chai series, have an audience with one campaign. The next campaign comes in, you're going to bring some of that audience with you into your next campaign and hopefully carry that much larger audience into the campaign after that. You should see a ladder effect. So again, if you're just starting out, maybe start smaller and start building towards these larger numbers. But if you do play your cards right, you should be able to increase that audience and get the size of that growing with each successive campaign.
Yeah. And to add to that a little bit, I would say, as long as you're delivering fairly close to on time and about as good of a quality as you promised during the campaign, you can certainly burn some bridges or decrease your following if you deliver something incredibly late or not as good quality as you promised.
That's a good point. I think reputation is, it's tough when it's your first game. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a challenge some people have with their first Kickstarters, is that they're not known, right? And often when you're going to back a game, you click on the person's name to see, have they launched another game? And if they did, how did it go? If you've never launched anything, people are taking an even larger chance with you that, hey, this may play out, it may not. Do they know what they're doing? Who knows? They've never launched a game before. So now that's a good point. Another reason why maybe start a little bit smaller if you're first starting out, and then kind of get into a bigger game maybe after that. Pledge managers. Although you can manage pledges yourself, which I've done. So I've done 2 campaigns, one with a pledge manager, one without. Initially, they were designed, pledge managers, to help you with complexity, right? So if you've got a game that's got all these different add-ons and these different things, it can be a little bit cumbersome to kind of figure out how to do the billing, collecting the money and so forth, and kind of organizing that. And that's what the pledge managers was there for. If you do it yourself, you get an opportunity to send one survey out, and it's not a very detailed survey. So, that's where the benefit is in terms of the organization. But for me, the pledge manager, the importance of it is with these larger campaigns is the marketing that comes behind them, right? So you take Backer Kid, or you take Crowdox, who have just recently got married and now they're Crowd Kid or whatever the new name's going to be. I don't know, maybe it's Backer Kid with powered by Crowdox, but they've merged. But both of them have massive email lists that they send out updates to on a monthly basis, saying, "Hey, here's the next games that we have that we're doing the pledge management for." That is thousands upon thousands of more eyeballs that you have access to that you may not have had access to if you hadn't used as a pledge manager. So for me, the pledge manager, yes, if you have a complex game, it's helpful. Not necessary if it's not a complex game. But if you're looking for the marketing elements of that, that's where I think that they play a very vital role. What are your thoughts on that? You used a pledge manager. I think you used Crowdox, didn't you?
Yeah, I use Crowdox, and if I were to do it again, I would use Crowdox again.
Or Backer Kit now.
Or Backer, yeah. Can't use Crowdox anymore. Just good. Any exposure is good exposure when you're in the middle of a campaign. And so the more eyeballs, the more your game's going to sell. And I think if I didn't have Crowdox, I wouldn't have funded as much as I did.
Yeah. And I'll say kudos to Chandler Copenhaver too. He has been absolutely fantastic for the Binge. He was some of our earlier interviews we did with him. He came back, he did a recap of learnings with us again, had him on again for explaining kind of what that merger meant. So he's been very generous with his time. So I know we rib him a lot because Mike and I shoot him notes here and there, but he's done great with Crowdox, and I know he's going to add a lot to the Backer Kid team as well. We wish him all the best. And then last for me was the social amplifier. Like I said, like Green Inbox. Backer Kit also has a marketing. You can hire them just for marketing, where they do social media amplification. But, to me, what I've seen is, and this is why I honed in on them right away when I saw, Steep Games use them, Facade Games use them. It piqued my interest because those are 2 massive campaigns. And what I've seen, if you go onto the Green Inbox website, it's not a guarantee they're going to hit these large numbers, but they've done a lot of multi-million-dollar campaigns, a lot. And they've done a lot of board games in the millions. So for me, that was a really key success factor for some of these much, much larger campaigns, is having some kind of team behind you that has software that can help manage the social media. Can you do it yourself? Absolutely. Could 2 or 3 of you do it yourself? Absolutely. but you kind of want to bring experts in if you want to get to some of those higher numbers, because you're going to waste a lot less money than if you just try to do it yourself.
Yeah.
And then I guess there's the other factors, right? So I said like the IP, obviously that's something that is kind of the outlier that you could not do any of these other things, but if you have the right IP, intellectual property, that can drive success. Not everybody can rely on that, obviously. And then I think, I forget who it was talking about it, but was mentioning that the type of game fit with Kickstarter is important, right? So games like Monopoly or those type of light type games don't do as well as games that have lots of minis, heavy into D&D, campaign style games, those heavy strategy games. Those seem to do very well on Kickstarter in terms of hitting some of these larger numbers. So I think that's been kind of interesting to see as well.
Yeah, I think that was Tanner Yarrow that said
Might have
that.
been Tanner. We got Tanner coming back. And this is why, if anytime anybody's like, gosh, you've talked to that person, why you bring that person back? 30 minutes is not a lot of time. And like Tanner literally threw on at me like 30 seconds after we went off air of, oh, you should have asked me about licensing. Is that something people would find interesting? It's like, what? Of course they would find that interesting. That's like a half-hour conversation in itself, of course. So we're going to get him back on. We're going to talk about licensing. He's got another campaign coming as well. So those two things will line up. So I think either this Thursday or Monday, I got to check my email when we're off here and we'll get him lined up, but he's going to come back. But yeah, it's important to kind of make sure you got that right fit. So for me, I just want to say thanks to, everybody that's been part of this journey with us so far. Mike and I look at the numbers behind the scenes, and, when we start putting this out on the audio podcast, I was excited to see the number of countries we're in. So do you know how many countries we're in, Mike?
No, I don't.
17. So we're in 17. So we're in the USA, Canada, India, Poland, UK, Japan, Denmark, Sweden, Brazil, Philippines, Australia, France, Germany, Morocco, Netherlands, Slovenia, and Uruguay. So all of our friends from all those countries, just a big warm thank you to each and every one of you for being part of this. It's cool when you see that the podcast is being listened to by somebody on the other side of the planet. Is a pretty cool feeling. Mm-hmm. For me, I was surprised, actually biggest surprise, that India is the second largest podcast market right now in the world, right next to the USA. Just for overall downloads across all podcasts, India's the second largest market. It is of all time for us since we've been on air, they're ranked number 3. But in the latest month, I think they actually jumped up to the number 2 spot, even above Canada. So hello to all of our friends in India who are listening to Board Game Binge. I think that's super, super awesome. So
sure.
Any final thoughts, Mike? I know this is a longer podcast than we normally do, but there was a lot we wanted to get through and really talk about all these highlights. Any final thoughts from your end?
Yeah, I think a couple to add to your list of things that'll help make your campaign successful. There's a lot of people in the industry that think they're going to make a big splash on Kickstarter. They don't get as big of a splash as they want, and then they disappear. And you never hear about them before or afterwards. But there's a lot of people in the industry like Jamie Stegmaier, like James Hudson, that you reach out to them and they'll give you their advice, and it's just their advice, but they're helping other people. Chandler, he calls it co-opetition, where you help out your competitors. And I think those people are the ones that really kind of have staying power in the industry. And so if you're looking to launch a campaign, what can you do beforehand to network, to connect with all these people? I know we had Eric Furston, a playtester, on the podcast, and getting his perspective was interesting. And he works with Stonemaier Games quite a bit. Yeah. He also works with other publishers. And I think doing something like that, it doesn't have to be a podcast. You don't have to do game reviews. You can just play games and kind of learn how to design a game, and also network with publishers. And then the final thing I would just say before we get off or change topics is I would love to hear who you guys want to have on the podcast. Either if you're listening to this on Pandora or whatever
iHeart or wherever. Yeah.
we're everywhere. If there's somebody in the industry that you want to have, let us know. Come join the Facebook group, and leave a comment on this podcast or any podcast, or send a message to me or James, and we'll do what we can to get them on the podcast.
Even if they go to boardgamebinge.com, so boardgamebinge.com, it is the best resource for this podcast. So not only can you join the audio podcast on your phone, you open up that website, you can click on the button that is your podcast provider of choice, whether it be Apple, Stitcher, Google, whatever. It's got the full history. So all the episodes we've done, there's filters. So you can filter by topic. So if you want to just listen to artists, or if you're interested in designers or maybe logistics, you can click on those filters and it'll filter down all the episodes to just the ones that are relevant to that topic. There's a form you can fill out, which we received, that just says, so if you want to reach out to us, just put the information in there. Again, whether you're looking to get on the podcast yourself, as Mike said, somebody you'd like to put on here, or just have any ideas for us. We're very open to hear it. We want to come at this from as many different directions as possible. We really do. And, your co-opetition, I love that term. It's so awesome. I have not seen any other industry that has competitors helping competitors as much as we've seen in this industry. It is crazy. And people have been so generous with their time, shockingly so. The people that have said, hey, sure, let's talk. I mean, Dan Kazmaier, I sent him an email today. I had a question on something. He got back to me in like 30 seconds, like literally 30 seconds. Like, it's like he was waiting for my text. That's crazy. I mean, Mike, you and I, we met on your first campaign, right? I was a backer. I had a brother that's a beekeeper. I was interested in the game. Reached out to you afterwards, said, hey, is there anything I can do to help? I want to see this thing be a success. And I think that's kind of what the heart of this is. Everybody that's in this industry loves playing board games, right? So even if it's somebody who's making their own board game and creating games for others, they love playing board games. They love playing other people's games. I saw Jamie Stagmeyer doing a review of chai, chai tea, because he thought it was so cool that the tiles fit in the channels on their board. You can lift up the board and the tiles didn't fall out. I mean, technically they're competitors, and here he is giving props to a good mechanic that he saw, or a good a function to their board. So it's just such a great industry to be part of, and it just brings me absolute joy to be part of it. So if people haven't joined our Facebook group already, please join our Facebook group. Either go to boardgamebinge.com. There is a button on the left side of that page that says join our Facebook group. You click that button, it'll take you to the Facebook group, or you just type in Board Game Binge in the search bar on Facebook and you'll find it. Why it's important to be part of the group. Number one is you can be part of these discussions live. So if you have questions for us, or if there's somebody we're interviewing that you're interested in, you can actually send us questions and we'll try to get to them and add as many as we can during that interview. Two, we're doing giveaways, and we're going to talk about some giveaways in a second, but we do giveaways fairly regularly. All you have to do is be a member. So there's people that have won giveaways that didn't even know they were entered into the draw. They're members of the group. We ran a draw. Their name came up and said, hey, you just won our draw. And they're like, what? I didn't even know I was entered. Yeah. If you're a member of the group, you're automatically entered. So there's benefits to being a member of our Facebook group. And then if you could, on the flip side, if you're part of our group, but you haven't subscribed to the audio podcast, it helps us with our numbers as well. So if you don't mind, if you're part of the Facebook group, if you can go over to our podcast again on boardgamebinge.com, do it on your phone. On there's links to the audio podcast. Please subscribe. If anything, if you miss an episode, the next day when you're brushing your teeth, you can listen to our episode, or maybe if you're in your car on the way somewhere, you can listen to the episode. You don't have to actually be watching the video. You can actually get the audio from those interviews. It's just the exact audio of what you would watch in one of our videos. And then, as Mike said, please send us your comments, suggestions. If there's someone you want to talk to, we want to talk to them. This podcast is all about people. That's what interests me. I always love the story behind how these things come together. So without further ado, Mike and I have something very exciting we want to talk about. So Mike, I don't know if you got something you can hold up to the camera there. Dun, dun, dun. So if people who are listening, Mike is holding up a copy of Queen Bee. Being an owner of this game myself, I can tell you this is probably one of the most mini heavy games I've ever played. or owned anyways. It weighs a ton. We're going to give a copy of Queen Bee away. We're going to do as part of our giveaway in the board game binge. I think in fairness to Elf Creek, who generously donated a copy of Honey Buzz, which again, it's not too late to get in on that. If you're not a member of our Facebook group, join the Facebook group. Just by being a member, you'll be entered into the draw. We're going to do that draw this coming Friday, I think. And then after that, we're going to do a draw for Mike's game, Queen Bee. And either at the same time or before or after, but someone else will win a copy of Tanks, but No Thanks, which is the board game that I launched. I found it was actually interesting, Mike, on a side note. Well, I was thinking about this morning. These two games actually have kind of similar mechanics, eh?
Yeah.
You realize that? Yeah. So you kind of, you roll to attack and a little bit different in terms of moving, but fun games. We're going to get these out before Christmas. So if people want to give them away as a Christmas present to somebody, they're absolutely, I'm sure they would love either of these games. And we're going to try to do as many giveaways as we can before Christmas, so people have some stuff they can give away to their loved ones. So thank you, everyone, for being part of this podcast. Mike, you've been awesome, man. Thank you so much for producing this podcast and all the people you've brought in. It's just getting started, man. I can't wait to see where we end.
Yep. Thank you, sir.
You take care. Cheers.
Bye.
This has been an episode of the Board Game Binge podcast, hosted by James Staley, produced by James Staley and Mike Bruner, with original music by Nick Smith. If you would like to watch these interviews live, simply join the Facebook group Board Game Binge, and you'll get access to live interviews, giveaways, and interesting board game content from across the industry. I can't wait for you to join us. See you next time.